Did you want to comment, Susan?
Well, for some teens, and I'm just going to give you the kind of example I remember coming upon when the some of the reasoning can just hit you right in the eye. One 13-year-old girl came into the clinic and she had been attacked by boys, and she said, "There's no way I'm going to be a girl." And she had no difficulties prior to that, but this triggered something in her mind. Now, when we have something where we can see more clearly some of the factors that are adding to this, it's if you can get them to say, look, it's better to wait and let's take some time and think about this, and the family, if you can get them to support this and keep working on it, it's what I've had some families where the kids have started doing this and the parents have just felt very confused about what they do. And when we've talked about, well, let's take our time, see what we can do about the things we can see, and see if we're getting anywhere with that. And some kids will go along with that. They're not all feeling that they've got to immediately go into a clinic. I mean, going into a clinic is exactly what you described, that it's just, this door next and that's it. So it's, if we've got resources in the community where people are willing to try to say, let's stop and talk for a while, because this is really a big decision. I've had some families who say they can make that work because the kid is maybe just partially committed to that idea. I don't know, but I would certainly try to get them doing something like that if it's possible. But I agree completely that if they go to a standard clinic in Canada or the US, they're never going to have that kind of opportunity to think about this and see if there are any other options that they could think about that might be okay for her. I think I've told a lot of people about the one that really hit me, because we were following up all the kids from the clinic over years, and we had a young boy who came in when he was around 10, and he was convinced that he should be a girl. And so we would see him regularly. He was in therapy. And I happened to be consulting to the agency. This was over in Orangeville, which is a part of this area up here. I was consulting, and he was being looked after by that children's aid. He'd been in various care homes, and but he got into our LGBTQ group that we'd been, and they fell in love. And I wasn't apprised of all of this, and I walked into the building and I looked at him and I said, "Holy moly, you're looking wonderful." And he said, "I'm not trans anymore. I'm gay. I've got a boyfriend." And it was just that kind of thing that allowed him to give it up. I often use the word find acceptance. And I think there's something about getting into a group. I'm not saying that everybody should go to an LGBT group, but something like that where they're seeing other people who accept them for who they are really matters when you're a teen. And there are different things like that I think have to be thought about or explored a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. Just some more questions here. Somebody just makes a comment. Much like the suicide rates have been inflated, so too have the rates of violence against trans people. Can you speak to rates of violence? I don't know if that's something you've looked at, but I had a bit of a...
Really, I mean, I know this.
Yeah, I have a
Yeah, they
sense that
haven't
that
played
is,
out. There's, if you look at the rates of trans people murdered or whatever, like, yeah, it's been inflated. Doesn't,
I
Yeah.
suspect a number of trans people are actually in the sex trade too, which may inflate those
yeah.
figures. Um, People want to know where they can make a difference. Is it possible to get involved in any kind of pushback against the dominant ideology? Any suggestions? Which
Well,
goes along with someone says the X platform in Canada is quite active. Might you consider this a powerful networking app? I'm not familiar with that app.
Oh yeah, it was Twitter, but now it's called
All right,
X.
right.
Yeah, no, there's already a lot, like Canadian Gender Report and GenSpect and Segum. They're all on X. People, when Elon Musk took over X, bought it, moved to a different platform called Blue Sky. Blue Sky is not at all tolerant of dialogue. If you start to bring up like evidence-based gender medicine, you will quickly be jumped on. And I only have an anonymous X account because I'm not interested in a lot of any more pylons of me. So we do have a group of Canadians who have been working very hard, and if anyone wants to get a hold of me, I can see if I can put you in touch with it. But we need people who are willing to actually work and do things, because it's been a very small group who have managed to do quite a bit. And as I kind of call it the underground resistance, just really sticking to the facts and seeing what we can do. Some people have met with, a lot of MPs, other people have done other things. Pam Buffone, who started the Canadian Gender Report, she had the human rights case with her 6-year-old daughter, becoming confused at school with the lessons. So, like, this is all already happening.
So somebody comments here that in Canada we have the Infants Act, which allows children to make decisions at age 14 if they show an understanding of their condition. Isn't this causing youth to make independent decisions when they really don't have the capacity to understand the risks and irreversible effects?
absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And even Daniel Metzger, who's the pediatric endocrinologist associated with the BC Children's Gender Clinic, there's a video of him that's made the rounds where he basically says these kids can't consent. You talk to them about, well, you may not be able to have kids, and they look at you blankly. He's like, it's like the type 1 diabetics. They think they're invincible. They'll live forever. They have no capacity to consent. But then he says, but give them what they want. Make them happy. So, it's very different being able to consent to, say, an appendectomy, which get your appendix out. If you didn't get it out, it could burst, you could die. If you get it out, there's going to be, very few long-term effects, most likely, versus something which is going to require lifelong medicalization with ongoing high risks of various health concerns.
I mean, it's interesting because some people would say, well, we allow girls at age 14, perhaps to have a pregnancy termination if that's their wish. But they are not perhaps looking at, as you say, the lifetime risks that you're exposing yourself to. That's a decision made in the here and now, but looking at what are you going to feel like when you're 30 about having children? Maybe if you have no sexual enjoyment in life at that period, you had no idea what that even was at the time you made the decision. So, yeah.
And I don't think people look ahead to like 50, 60, 70, 80. They just think they're really cute as 20-year-olds.
Yeah, that's right. It's solving their immediate problem.
Yeah.
Or they think it is. Yeah.
For those who are doing it younger on.
So somebody wants to know, has anybody in Canada done research on how many of the younger puberty-blocked children are proto-gay and lesbian? I wonder if information on these protocols are homophobic. If information shows they're homophobic, so not quite getting this, could help get through to the largely uninformed Canadian public. Oh, I see. So if people in the public realize that a lot of these children being blocked, this may come from some sort of homophobia in the kids, around them, or their own internalized, would that be helpful for the public to know?
I think that's a major issue, that homophobia, even though we like to think we're over all of the prejudice, attitudes that we've had for years, it's still there. Kids as teens do a lot of teasing of one another, and these are some of the kinds of things that come up as slurs. You're this and you're that, and it isn't. To me, it's a very hard thing to deal with. And eventually, I think we'll get there, but we're not there yet. So
I think also, like, I have a number of gay friends who are pro transitioning youth because they remember what it was like for them growing up and how discriminated they were against and things like that. And so they somehow lose the capacity to step back and look at the actual evidence because they're so emotionally connected.
yeah.
Not recognizing that you're kind of interfering with the normal development of a lot of these gay youth, women gay youth.
I also wonder, and I have friends and some of the people on this webinar who spend a lot of time as teachers going through textbooks, getting rid of sex role stereotypes. They seem to have a return to them. A lot of the stuff that comes out on this issue is just reinforcing, well, if you think this or that, you've got a pink brain or a blue brain or whatever it is, which is just really confirming the norms that require you to behave a certain way if you're this sex or that sex. And if you want to be anything different, I think lots of these kids are non-binary now by just rejecting traditional sex roles, which doesn't mean you have to reject your sex.
or your body, right?
Or your body, absolutely.
Because I think it's about, you can be whoever you want to be, keep your body intact.
You can be and do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Whatever the body in our democratic societies. Somebody's making a point here. To Jennifer Bielek in the US has done a study of the vast amounts of money being made by pharmacy companies in the US. Might you comment on the profits made by pharmaceutical companies and others making profits through affirming care?
That it's a general problem in the U.S. about a lot of things, and I don't know whether that's really a separate issue around the gender thing or not. But it's a big issue in the U.S. anyway.
Well, for sure, like Pritzkers who are billionaires, who Jennifer Pritzker, who used to be James, but I can't remember which association it was. If it was Pritzker or Stryker. One of these American organizations gave $1 million to University of Victoria to start the chair in gender studies. So that has come into Canada. And that is like in the media. I think it was 1 million. It might have been 2 million. So that's public knowledge.
Yeah, it's very interesting when women's studies morphed into gender studies and what that did to these issues. So there's a specific question here. Has any physicians from Nova Scotia ever privately confessed agreement with you? It is so captured here. I've known 2 teens put on hormone blockers with 0 counseling, both with obvious family trauma and obvious underlying psychological disorders. Everyone gets immediately referred to the gender experts. So have you had any contacts from Nova Scotia?
I don't think specifically. There are a number of physicians in the Macdonald-Laurier Institute associated with that. So that's sort of a center-right think tank. So people often don't like to pay much attention to what the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, but they have a number of physicians. I don't know if any are from Nova Scotia, and I don't know anyone myself personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this person goes on to say, few other disorders get specialty clinics all to themselves. They see an endocrinology clinic or orthopedic clinic. How does a disorder so niche get to have its own offices and facilities? Maybe the numbers these days. I don't know.
Well, I think, Susan, you could speak to, like, back in the beginning, nobody really knew what to do with these kids.
Yeah.
So you started to clinic. Yeah.
Yeah. No. But it really morphed as soon as they got rid of Ken Zucker into what the trans wanted. And but there was another sidebar. I was friends with one of the psychologists who was running the adult gender clinic, and we were off trying to help people think about what's going on and talking to each other about all the clients and so on. Uh, I asked him what he felt about the adult trans patients that they had in the clinic. And he said, well, the problem is they are still always trying to make themselves more perfect. So they go for operation after operation after operation, trying to be the perfect whatever it is that they had become. And that speaks really to the issue of this is just a feeling that there's something still imperfect about me. And even though I've transitioned, I'm still not perfect. And, you get into these kind of situations where you can't do much about it because they're there and they have a right to ask for nose surgery, esophageal surgery, a lot of the different kinds of surgery, which surgeons will provide, but the public is paying for all of this, and so we're getting into a system which is really just costly and not really helping anybody do very much of anything. So that's to me, is a problem.
Well, I mean, Ontario just approved for one person like a penis preserving vaginoplasty, so they'd have both.
That's being binary in another sense, yes.
Yeah, but like where does it end?
Well, I mean, I think that femininity, masculinity, who we are as one sex or the other is such a combination of genes and hormones and all of that together. And so you can change the bits, you can take something off or put something in. It doesn't change the genetic makeup that you have, which determines a lot of brain function, etc. And so then you have I shouldn't say unholy, but a real mix of competing things trying to come out with a package that feels like the real thing, really are that sex. I think that must be very confusing to our whole physiology and brain.
Sure.
Well, okay. It's just another question here. Somebody's wondering why Dr. Metzger, I'm not familiar with Dr. Metzger, seems to be a media darling. He's in every CBC article and news story, despite all the leaked videos of him admitting that consent can't be given by these young kids, that they don't have an understanding of what they're giving up and come back in their 20s looking for fertility options, but that he just wants to make them happier in the moment. I don't know if you're aware of this.
Yeah, no, I spoke about it a bit earlier. I think so there was the Canadian Pediatric Society did a position statement on gender affirming care, and he was a co-author. And then there was a paper against it, which brought up the systematic reviews. And then he and I guess his co-author did another paper basically digging themselves back into their position statement. And I think one of the reasons that he's a media darling is the media is just supportive of gender affirming care. Mm-hmm. And so they look for people who are supporting gender affirming care. And he is one of them. And he's, because he's written this position statement, he's, supposedly an expert.
Right. Yes. Okay, and somebody is asking, have you had experience with autogynephilia as it pertains to trans?
Yeah.
Autogynephilia. Well, that goes way back. One of the people at the Clark, whose name I keep on forgetting, really coined that.
Ray Blanchard?
Say that again.
Ray Blanchard?
Well, I don't know whether it was Ray primarily or somebody else, but it was with Ray's sort of cooperation that we all of the gender clinics tended to see a mix of other kids that had any kind of thing, and a lot of us were seeing kids who were um, really not, they weren't so much trans as they were um, doing lots of different sexual kinds of things. And some of them seem to be fringing on trans, but the adult clinic really saw this group as significantly different from the trans subjects in their sample, because they were nearly all older men who decided to transition in their 30s or 40s after they were married, and it was just a different path that they were on, and they got sexual pleasure out of dressing up and acting as a female in sex, and that's what the autogynephilia is all about. That's the meaning of it, and but some of them did transition. They were in a group that did, but lots of them don't. So
Yeah.
it's not a group that we know all that much about.
So it's seen more as a sexual fetish, but the term autogynephilia is
Yeah.
as reviled as the term, rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
So trans activists try and wipe out and dispel that there's any such thing as autogynephilia or rapid onset gender dysphoria.
The curious thing, maybe it's not curious, is why all the noise and bluster and pushback seems to come from trans women. We don't seem to hear anything from trans men complaining about this. I don't know. Is that your experience?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think for starters, trans men, it's easier for them to pass because you give them testosterone, their voices deepen, they get the male pattern balding, as long as they're kind of tall enough and they're not like super short. And I think they, for the most part, are living their lives. I think it just becomes a lot more political for the trans women. And I'm absolutely no expert in that, but if you think about it, if we think about biology as well, in general, if you look at groups of men and women, it probably falls more along those lines anyway, in terms of sex. So maybe it's just reflective of their underlying sex. I don't know.
No, okay. And I have a last question here. I know we're getting close to running out of time. Can you speak to the WPATH files? I guess you're probably following those.
What's important about that is that nearly all of the gender clinics around the world really accepted what WPATH said in the beginning, and we all felt that they were setting the standard. And over time, we began to realize that they were setting an affirmative care standard and not really looking at the evidence. And they acknowledged that they were not looking at the evidence. Excuse me. Yeah, I'll just take that and get rid of it, I think.
So, the other thing that happened was they only said for their latest standards of care, so version 8, that it was evidence-based. And if you look at WPATH, you don't have to be physicians to be a member. There's a lot of like activists. And so now that it's come out, not only the W files, which was internal emails and internal listserv, just of various questions, but now that you actually have the evidence that the WPATH, executive suppressed Johns Hopkins University from publishing systematic reviews, I think that is much more important than the WPATH files itself, which was just a bunch of clinicians who associated themselves with WPATH asking questions where the answer always was transition. Someone's psychotic, well, still transition. You know, I think that was the kind of stuff that was going on in the WPATH files, but you know, WPATH is really losing its credibility, and it's just a matter of time before Canada catches up with this because it's not a credible organization.
Yep.
Right. Yes, there's been a lot coming out on that. Well, I think we're at the end of our time. We've had a lot of interesting questions. You've certainly given us a lot to think and worry about. It's very helpful to know that there are people like the two of you still working on this, and that you, Dr. Bradley, have not given up the fight after all this time. and you, Dr. Sinai, are sort of holding the fort here largely on your own, but we hope you'll be joined by many other people. And when we get this webinar is going to come out as a YouTube down the road as soon as we get that organized. And you can find out about that on Women's Space website when that appears. We want to thank you both very much for not just being here, but the ongoing work that you do. This is so important and so helpful to children and adolescents when that information gets out and we protect them from dire things that could ruin their whole lives. So thank you so much from all of us.
Thanks, Penny. I'm always happy to speak to this topic.
Yeah.
Okay.